Look closely. That's not a tumor. That's a tree, growing inside a man's lung. He thought he was dying. The chest pain, the blood, doctors were convinced it was cancer. But during surgery, what they found wasn't a tumor, it was a living, 5-centimeter pine tree, rooted deep in his lung tissue. And that's only the beginning. Today, you'll hear 3 real-life stories that sound completely made up. A man who grew a tree inside his body, a family on the run from a mafia that never existed, and a son who calmly picked up an axe and turned against his own parents. These stories are true, but they will make you question everything you believe about reality. The tree growing inside a man's lung. Yes, there have been documented cases of plants growing inside the human body, though they are exceedingly rare and often bizarre. Notable cases of plants growing inside humans. Pea plant in Massachusetts, 2010. A 75-year-old man in Brewster of Massachusetts experienced shortness of breath and chest pain. His condition grew progressively worse, with symptoms like fatigue and occasional coughing. Initially, he tried to dismiss these discomforts, attributing them to normal aging, but when the chest pain intensified and he began coughing up blood, he could no longer ignore it. Terrified, he finally went to the emergency room, where doctors took immediate action. Based on his pale appearance, labored breathing, and the blood in his cough, they feared a serious health condition, possibly a tumor. After performing an X-ray, the doctors were stunned when the radiologist confirmed the presence of a mass growing inside his lung. The immediate assumption was that the mass was a tumor, which, given the man's symptoms, seemed likely. However, to avoid making a drastic decision about removing large portions of lung tissue, the doctors decided to perform a biopsy to determine whether it was malignant. The results came back as a shock not only to the patient but also to the entire medical team. The growth inside his lung was not a tumor, it was a pea plant, sprouting from a seed that had somehow lodged in his lung. The plant, having found a dark, moist environment within the lung, had begun to grow. The doctors speculated that the man had accidentally inhaled the seed, which, against all odds, germinated in the warm, damp conditions of his lung. While his diagnosis was far from the cancer they had feared, the bizarre nature of the situation was undeniable. For the man, this unexpected discovery, although startling, came with an immense sense of relief. He was cancer-free. Fir tree in Russia, 2009. In a case that garnered international attention, a Russian man named Artyom Sidorkin, a botanist by profession, had an even more extraordinary encounter with a plant inside his body. Sidorkin had been suffering from persistent chest pain, and his condition worsened when he began coughing up blood. Initially, the symptoms were vague, and like many others, Sidorkin attempted to push through the discomfort. However, as the pain became more intense, coupled with the troubling blood, he was forced to seek medical attention. Upon arriving at the hospital, doctors were alarmed by his symptoms and ordered a series of tests. They suspected a tumor in his lungs, given the intensity of the pain and the blood he was coughing up. When the X-ray results came in, the doctors confirmed there was indeed a mass in Sidorkin's lungs, and it seemed to be growing at an alarming rate. Based on his history and symptoms, they moved quickly to schedule surgery, fearing that they might be dealing with a rapidly spreading cancer. However, when the surgeon removed a sample of tissue from Sidorkin's lung, he made a shocking discovery. The tissue appeared to be hiding something very unusual. Upon closer examination, the surgeon discovered that what looked like a mass of tissue was, in fact, a small fir tree, about 5 centimeters long, with vibrant green needles. It was thriving within the tissue of his lung. Sidorkin, who had long studied plants, was stunned to learn that a seed he had presumably inhaled had germinated inside his lung. The doctors who examined him theorized that the seed must have been lodged there during one of his field trips, where he spent much of his time studying plants in nature. The tree had begun to grow in the dark, oxygen-rich environment of his lung, where its roots had pierced his blood vessels, leading to the blood he had been coughing up. The discovery of a tree inside Sidorkin's lung was something even botanists had never expected to encounter. Experts explain that although it is biologically possible for a seed to germinate inside the human body, especially in such a moist environment, it was an extremely rare phenomenon. botanists and doctors speculated that the seed had found its way into Sidorkin's lung in a dormant state, and the warm, moist environment of the lung was just the right setting for it to grow. As odd as it was, the tree's growth inside his body turned out to be a medical curiosity rather than a deadly disease. Sidorkin was elated to learn that the growth was not cancerous and that the tree could be removed without further complications. His relief was palpable. What he initially feared to be a terminal diagnosis was instead a surreal, life-changing experience. For a plant to grow inside the human body, certain conditions must be met. First, a viable seed or spore must be introduced into the body, which could happen through inhalation, as in Sidorkin's case, or through ingestion. The seed must then find a suitable place within the body to germinate. The environment it finds must be warm and moist, ideally a part of the body that can provide nutrients, like the lungs or digestive system. The conditions within the lungs are particularly conducive to this type of germination, as they are dark and humid, resembling the environment in which many plants typically thrive. Once a seed is lodged in a suitable environment, the body's immune response plays a significant role in determining whether the plant can survive and continue to grow. The immune system typically detects and eliminates foreign substances quickly, so for a plant to grow, it must evade this response long enough to establish itself. This means that the seed must be in a location where the body does not immediately recognize it as a threat, which is an incredibly rare circumstance. While such occurrences are extraordinary, they highlight how complex the human body is and the unforeseen ways in which biological processes can play out. For the seed to successfully germinate and grow, it also requires protection from external factors, such as the body's immune cells, which are designed to attack and neutralize foreign invaders. If the seed successfully bypasses the body's defenses, it can begin to grow, sometimes causing complications like bleeding, as was the case with Sidorkin's tree. While fascinating, these cases highlight potential risks to health. One of the primary concerns is the inhalation of foreign objects. In the case of Sidorkin, the seed that became a fir tree was presumably inhaled while he was working in nature, possibly during his botanical studies. Seeds and spores from various plants are small and lightweight, and when inhaled, they can become lodged in the airways or lungs. This may lead to unexpected growths, potentially obstructing airflow and causing symptoms like coughing, chest pain, and difficulty breathing. Another critical concern is the immune system's response to foreign plant material. The immune system may fail to recognize and eliminate the plant material if it remains hidden in a part of the body that does not normally come into contact with foreign particles. This can allow the plant to continue growing unchecked, causing further complications. In Sidorkin's case, the tree's growth resulted in the penetration of blood vessels, leading to bleeding in his lungs. Finally, there is a potential for infection when foreign objects, like seeds or plants, grow inside the human body. The growth of such material can cause tissue damage or introduce bacteria that may lead to infection. In cases where the plant grows deep into lung tissue, as with Sidorkin's tree, the complications could range from mild irritation to severe respiratory issues, depending on the location and size of the growth. If you suspect that you've inhaled or ingested a foreign object, particularly a seed or spore, it is crucial to seek medical attention promptly. Early detection and treatment are key in preventing further complications. These rare occurrences serve as a reminder of how vulnerable the human body can be to the unintended consequences of nature. A Hidden Life, Pauline Dakin and the Mafia Delusion. Growing up, Pauline Dakin always felt that something was off about her family. Her childhood, shrouded in confusion and unease, had always been unsettling. Despite the seemingly normal family life in Vancouver, there were frequent, unexplained changes in their routines, places, and even social interactions. Pauline's father, Warren, was known for his volatile temper, heavy drinking, and violent outbursts. While it wasn't exactly a secret that her parents' relationship was tumultuous, it was the secrecy surrounding their family that truly puzzled Pauline. Little did she know, the true extent of the strangeness that engulfed her life was tied to an even deeper psychological disorder, folie à deux. Folie à deux, or shared psychotic disorder, is a rare psychological condition where two individuals, typically in a close relationship, share a delusional belief. The term itself translates as madness for two from French, and it primarily occurs in family structures where one person, known as the inducer, has an established delusion, and another person, known as the induced, adopts the same belief. This phenomenon is incredibly rare but profoundly impactful, as it leads to individuals being enveloped in delusions that can alter their perceptions of reality. In the case of Pauline's family, it wasn't just a fleeting belief but a pervasive, all-encompassing delusion that dominated their lives. Pauline's mother, Ruth, started exhibiting signs of severe paranoia long before Pauline fully understood what was happening. Ruth's increasingly erratic behavior and her constant state of anxiety grew worse as Pauline got older. At the age of 5, Pauline's parents separated, a change that was not shocking given her father's behavior, but it was Ruth's actions following the separation that began to take on an increasingly disturbing tone. Within months, Ruth moved the family far away from Vancouver, settling in a new home in Winnipeg. Pauline's confusion deepened as her mother insisted that they never return to Vancouver, claiming it was for their safety. Ruth said little about why they couldn't go back but often alluded to mysterious, shadowy threats that loomed over them. As Pauline entered her teen years, her mother's actions became even more bizarre. Ruth would constantly insist on moving the family, sometimes without explanation, and she'd frequently tell Pauline to keep their whereabouts a secret. Pauline noticed how her mother seemed to be preparing for something. In their home, food would mysteriously disappear, and Ruth would throw out perfectly good groceries, claiming that someone was trying to poison them. She warned Pauline and her brother not to trust anyone, even people who seemed familiar, insisting that their lives were at risk from unknown enemies. These constant upheavals continued until Pauline was in her early 20s. By this time, she had become increasingly suspicious about her mother's motivations. Despite Ruth's insistence that they were being hunted by a powerful mafia organization, Pauline could never grasp the full gravity of her mother's claims. It was only when Pauline was an adult, living 2 hours away in New Brunswick and working as a reporter, that her mother contacted her, saying she needed to meet. What would follow was a revelation that would change Pauline's understanding of her entire life. In a motel room, Ruth finally disclosed the full extent of her delusion. She confided in Pauline that her father, Warren, wasn't just a heavy drinker and violent man but was involved in a notorious organized crime syndicate in Vancouver. Ruth believed that after their separation, the mob had put a hit on her, believing she knew too much. Ruth also claimed that Stan Sears, a reverend from their church, was not only a close confidant but had also been targeted by the mob. The story was unbelievable, and at first, Pauline struggled to comprehend it, even as Ruth insisted that they had to live in hiding, moving across Canada from Winnipeg to New Brunswick to avoid being found. Ruth described how Stan had secretly moved with them, maintaining their cover. The truth that Pauline would soon discover was both more surreal and tragic than anything she could have imagined. Her mother's increasingly erratic behavior, moving, hiding, destroying food, was not the result of just a paranoid mind. It was rooted in folie à deux. Ruth's delusions were shared by Stan, and eventually, the disorder passed on to Pauline. For years, she had been living in a world that was constructed by this delusion, a reality that was as false as it was terrifying. Pauline's emotional turmoil deepened as she learned how deep the delusion had infiltrated her family's life. Every strange decision, every odd move across the country, every unexplained behavior now seemed to make sense. Ruth had manipulated her into a world of lies, a world where the mafia's shadow loomed large. And yet, what was truly shocking was the realization that her mother, despite her delusions, was completely convinced of the truth of her actions. The belief in the mafia's pursuit was so real to Ruth that even the simplest things, like food or clothing, became symbols of a sinister plot against them. Pauline's journey into this world of deception didn't end with her mother's confession. The emotional toll it took was immense. She felt betrayed, confused, and more than anything, trapped in a psychological prison of her mother's making. Even after hearing the truth, the damage had been done. Pauline's reality had been shaped by someone else's delusion, and now she had to come to terms with the fact that her childhood had been nothing but a series of fabricated events. Her mother, despite the overwhelming evidence that their lives were not in danger from the mafia, continued to cling to the belief, as did Stan. Eventually, Pauline's sense of identity began to unravel as she questioned everything she had ever known. The more she uncovered, the more fragmented her sense of self became. It wasn't just about learning the truth of her mother's delusion, it was about understanding how deeply her life had been manipulated. The years of moving, hiding, and living in fear were now understood to be the result of folie à deux, a psychological condition that had irreparably altered her life. The emotional and psychological toll of this discovery was immense for Pauline. She had to reframe her entire understanding of her childhood and adolescence. Her relationship with her mother, already strained, became more complicated than ever. In the end, it was through writing a memoir, Run, Hide, Repeat, that Pauline was able to process her trauma and gain some form of closure. Through her writing, she found a way to make sense of a life that had been turned upside down by a delusion, and in doing so, she was able to confront the demons of her past. Her memoir became a testament to her journey, one not just of discovering the truth, but also of reclaiming her own narrative. Pauline's story of survival and emotional resilience is a poignant reminder of the enduring effects of folie à deux and the strength it takes to uncover the truth after living in the grip of someone else's delusions. Chris Porco, the son who killed his parents. Christopher Porco's case is one that continues to stir a sense of disbelief, not just because of the heinous nature of the crime, but because of the complexity of the motivations that drove him to take such a drastic step against his own family. The shocking murder of his father, Peter Porco, and the near-fatal attack on his mother, Joan Porco, in their Bethlehem, New York, home on November 15, 2004, has gripped the attention of the public and remains a tragic chapter in the Porco family's story. On the morning of November 15, 2004, the Porco household in Bethlehem became the scene of a gruesome attack. Peter, who had woken up for his regular routine, was struck 16 times in the head with an axe. Despite these horrific injuries, he was still able to perform his usual tasks, like packing his lunch and gathering his newspaper. It was only after completing these seemingly mundane chores that Peter finally succumbed to his injuries. His death was not immediate. It was a slow and agonizing end, as he believed, up until his last moments, that he was just going about his regular morning routine. Joan, his wife, was also brutally attacked, suffering severe head injuries, including the loss of an eye and significant damage to her skull. Miraculously, she survived the attack and was rushed to a hospital, where she underwent emergency surgery. After regaining consciousness, Joan was able to identify her son, Christopher, as the person responsible for the attack. However, her memory of the event was hazy due to the extent of her injuries, and at one point, she claimed to have no recollection of what transpired. As the investigation began, it was clear that there was no obvious motive for the attack. However, investigators soon uncovered a disturbing set of circumstances surrounding Christopher. A 21-year-old student at the University of Rochester at the time, Chris had been struggling financially. He had taken out large loans in his father's name by forging Peter's signature, which raised alarm bells within the family. Peter and Joan had discovered Chris's financial wrongdoings and were understandably upset. They had tried to confront him about his forgeries and the mounting debts that had put the entire family's financial stability at risk. The tensions between them had been escalating, and it became clear that these issues may have contributed to Chris's violent outburst. In the aftermath of the attack, it was revealed that Chris had been at the scene that fateful night. Initially, he claimed to be on campus, far from the home where the crime took place. However, surveillance footage and toll records indicated that Chris's yellow Jeep had been near the family home at the time of the attack. Furthermore, the discovery of his forged loans and the financial strain they caused between Chris and his parents pointed to a potential financial motive for the crime. The unresolved tension, coupled with his increasing desperation over the discovery of his fraud, appeared to have triggered the violence. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was Chris's demeanor in the days following the attack. When news of his parents' brutal assault reached the public, Chris appeared unaffected, even detached. He called the police to inquire about his parents, feigning concern for their well-being, but his calm, almost nonchalant tone raised suspicion among those investigating the case. His response to the horrific crime seemed disconnected from the reality of what had happened. As detectives pieced together the timeline and gathered evidence, it became more and more evident that Chris was not just a concerned son, but the actual perpetrator of the crime. What followed was an intense investigation that revealed the extent of Chris's lies and his involvement in the crime. The authorities connected his financial troubles with his violent actions, and the evidence against him began to mount. Despite his attempt to distance himself from the crime, the truth eventually came to light. Chris had killed his father and severely injured his mother in a brutal act of rage. The emotional toll on the Porco family was devastating. While the investigation into the crime was ongoing, Joan, despite being the victim, had a complex emotional response to the situation. She had been horrified by the discovery that her own son was responsible for the horrific attack. Yet, in a tragic turn of events, Joan's unwavering maternal bond led her to post bail for Chris during his trial. She visited him frequently during his time in prison, still maintaining a connection to the son who had nearly killed her. It was a decision that confused many, and the emotional complexities of a mother's love for her child were evident in her actions. In court, the defense tried to argue that Chris was not guilty of murder, suggesting that he may have been under extreme financial pressure and emotional stress. However, the prosecution presented a clear case, showing that the attack was premeditated and that Chris's actions were driven by a combination of financial desperation and personal rage. In August 2006, a jury convicted Chris of second-degree murder and assault. He was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Since his conviction, Chris has continued to maintain his innocence. Over the years, he has filed multiple appeals, citing claims of ineffective legal counsel and violations of due process during his trial. His appeals have been dismissed, but in 2023, he filed a 440 motion, seeking to vacate his conviction. He argued that new evidence and legal issues warranted a new trial, prompting the Schenectady County District Attorney's Office to review the case. Despite his ongoing legal battles, Chris remains incarcerated at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, and is not eligible for parole until 2052. The Porco case is one that highlights the complexities of family dynamics and the psychological factors that can lead to such a violent and tragic act. For Chris, the pressures of his financial situation and his deteriorating relationship with his parents may have created the perfect storm for the explosion of violence that occurred. The shock of discovering that their own son could commit such an act has left the surviving members of the family grappling with questions of guilt, betrayal, and forgiveness. As the years go on, the tragedy of the Porco family remains a stark reminder of how financial pressures, familial conflicts, and psychological instability can collide in the most horrific of ways. For Joan, the road to healing is far from over, as she continues to struggle with the emotional scars left by her son's betrayal and the painful reality of being a victim of such violence. For Chris, the possibility of redemption remains uncertain, as he faces the long road ahead in prison, fighting against the conviction that has marked him as a killer. The strange, twisted tales we've explored delve into some deeply unsettling aspects of human psychology. What makes these stories so bizarre isn't just the extraordinary nature of the events, but the psychological elements that connect them. When we examine the role of delusion, mental health, and the powerful impact of familial bonds, a clearer picture begins to emerge, one that reveals the complex ways in which perception and reality collide. At the heart of these stories lies a fundamental psychological principle: the human mind's capacity to shape reality, often in ways that seem illogical or impossible. Delusions, in particular, are a key factor in many of these narratives. Delusions aren't just odd thoughts, they are deeply entrenched beliefs that defy reality. And what's even more perplexing is that people who harbor such beliefs often feel utterly convinced of their truth, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Take, for example, the case of a mother and her son, where a shared delusion led to a series of increasingly bizarre actions. The mother, unable to break free from her irrational beliefs, passed them on to her son, reinforcing his distorted worldview. This condition, known as folie à deux or shared psychosis, occurs when two people, often in an intimate relationship, adopt each other's delusions. What starts as an isolated belief can spiral out of control, leading both individuals to act on an imagined threat that doesn't exist, yet seems very real to them. This is a powerful reminder of how the human mind can create realities that seem just as real as the world outside. Moreover, the psychological dynamics within families play a huge role in shaping individuals' behavior and perception of reality. Familial relationships are not just influenced by love and support, they can also be marred by psychological manipulation, enabling delusions to thrive. When a family member becomes convinced of something fantastical, others around them, especially those close to them, can be swept up in the same beliefs, even if they know, deep down, that it doesn't make sense. This sense of loyalty, or even fear, can lead individuals to support these delusions, helping them grow stronger and more pervasive. This psychological phenomenon goes hand in hand with the concept of perception versus reality. People often interpret events through the lens of their emotional state, past experiences, or cognitive biases. In these stories, the characters involved often misinterpret the world around them, leading to violent, irrational acts. When faced with challenges, the mind can distort the facts, fabricating narratives that seem to justify extreme behavior. A person's belief in their distorted reality can drive them to take actions that, from an outside perspective, appear utterly senseless. The extreme lengths to which these individuals go highlight the lengths to which someone can be pushed when they believe in something so deeply that it becomes the foundation of their reality. Whether it's a son committing unspeakable violence against his own parents or a family abandoning all logic to protect a fabricated world, the effects of delusion are profound. These acts aren't just fueled by malice, they are driven by a deep, often unconscious belief in the truth of a warped reality. What's particularly disturbing is that, in many cases, the victims of these delusions are the people closest to the delusional individuals. In the case of the mother and son, for example, the mother was complicit in the delusions that led to dangerous and destructive behavior. This tragic outcome shows how, within family dynamics, the line between concern, support, and enabling can easily blur. The role of mental health in these situations cannot be overstated. What may start as an innocuous belief or feeling of anxiety can, under the right, or wrong, circumstances, escalate into a dangerous obsession, affecting not just the individual but those around them. In many of these bizarre cases, the individuals involved displayed a disturbing calmness when faced with the consequences of their actions. This detachment is another facet of psychological disturbance. In some cases, the perpetrator may have become so lost in their delusion that they no longer recognize the magnitude of their actions. Instead, they may approach these grave situations with a chilling sense of normalcy, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, of the damage they've caused. It's a defense mechanism, a way of dissociating from the reality of the situation in order to maintain their distorted beliefs. By understanding the psychology behind these stories, we begin to see the deep connection between mental health and the actions that follow. Delusions, manipulated perceptions, and familial dynamics are all interconnected in shaping the behavior of those involved. As we examine these stories further, we must consider the intricate balance between mental health, reality, and the extreme lengths to which some individuals will go to preserve a version of reality that fits their psychological needs. And, as we continue to explore the chilling details of these lives, we start to question, what happens when the boundaries between truth and fiction blur beyond repair? What does it take for someone to fully embrace a reality that everyone else can see as a lie? So, what these stories teach us about reality and human nature? In these bizarre and unsettling stories, we are forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The line between fiction and reality is often far more blurred than we'd like to admit. The human mind has an incredible ability to craft elaborate narratives, sometimes at the cost of what is real. These stories don't just intrigue us because of their strange details or shocking twists. They reveal something profound about human nature and the psychology behind belief. One of the most significant lessons these tales impart is the importance of questioning the reality we are presented with. It's easy to accept things at face value, especially when they come from people we trust or systems we rely on. But as these stories show, reality is subjective and malleable, shaped by the lens through which we view the world. Delusions, mental health struggles, and even shared psychoses can twist perceptions in ways that make us believe the most unbelievable things. These stories highlight just how far belief can go, how a person can build an entire reality around a falsehood, and how easily others can be drawn into that world. What these strange, real-life stories also expose is the intricate relationship between psychology and belief. Human beings are hardwired to make sense of the world, to find patterns and explanations that fit our understanding, even if that means creating stories out of thin air. The phenomenon of delusion is particularly fascinating because it reveals how fragile our sense of reality can be. Whether it's a mob conspiracy that doesn't exist or a tree growing in a man's lung, belief systems can shape actions, interactions, and even the course of entire lives. The power of belief is not just in what we accept as true, but in how those truths, however warped, affect those around us. Moreover, these stories underscore a deeper, more unsettling aspect of human nature, the need to maintain control over our reality. We see this in how people refuse to let go of their delusions, even when confronted with evidence to the contrary. There's a certain psychological safety in clinging to what we know, even if that knowledge is false. This denial of reality isn't just a coping mechanism, it's an active refusal to face the disorienting discomfort of truth. In these stories, characters go to extreme lengths to preserve their version of events, demonstrating just how much people will sacrifice to avoid the existential anxiety that comes with questioning their beliefs. The impact of these tales doesn't stop with the characters involved. As readers, we are invited to reflect on our own perceptions of reality. How often do we blindly accept the narratives presented to us? How do we interpret the world around us, and what beliefs might we be holding onto, consciously or unconsciously, that shape our actions and relationships? The key takeaway from these stories isn't just about the bizarre circumstances. They are a mirror, reflecting back to us the way our own minds might twist reality in small or large ways. In conclusion, these stories challenge us to think critically about the boundaries of truth and perception. They remind us that what we believe to be real is often just a construct, shaped by our emotions, our experiences, and our need for meaning. The strange, unexpected paths these individuals walk serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked belief and the importance of questioning the narratives we accept. As we navigate our own lives, we must consider the possibility that our understanding of reality might not be as solid as we think. And perhaps that uncertainty is where true self-awareness begins. 3 true stories, each more unbelievable than the last. But they don't just shock us. They force us to ask, what if the truth we trust isn't truth at all? If this left you stunned, good. Because there are even stranger stories to come. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss a tale that will bend your mind and blur your reality. And tell us in the comments, which story shook you the most? Or have you ever experienced something so strange, no one believed you?